Hello and welcome back to this downfully dualistic crusade. This video will be going over the handful of titles I picked up from Eureka and their recent sale and also some of their new releases. So some of these were pre-orders and I had to wait a while, but they were, as usual, some really excellent horror titles. They are licensing more and more things from the Universal Library, and so they are basically duplicating a lot of what Shout Factory has done here in the States, but in much fancier editions with nice limited slipcovers and more extras and better encoding. So I have waited for more of these because the Shout releases are a bit pricey, and I know Eureka is doing more and more of these titles, so it's always fascinating to see what sort of pairings they put together in these packages, usually along a certain theme. And with the sale they ran as well, I was able to pick up some more classic horror-related titles that I'd just been meaning to get, and as always, their website's really easy to use, and they still offer free international shipping, regardless of how much you order, which I find absolutely incredible. So if you've never ordered from them and you have region-free capability, please do so and support their great work. It's, again, very user-friendly, and, again, all their shipping is free internationally, which, again, is mind-boggling. So first up is from the Masters of Cinema series. This is Spine 236. It's the standard edition of the 1928 masterpiece, The Man Who Laughs, starring Conrad Veidt and directed by the great Paul Linney. This is a key film in what became Universal Horror. It's another of the great silent masterworks that, again, sort of falls in the horror realm, even though the story itself isn't exactly, technically horrifying, but it's a film that always remains in your brain once you see it. It's a film you can't ever forget, particularly due to Veidt's performance as the traumatized and scarred Gwynplaine. This, of course, is the film that legendarily inspired the creation of the Joker in the golden age of Batman comics in terms of the overall look and design. It's also sort of an outlier because, of course, it doesn't star Lon Chaney, but it sort of follows in the tradition that was started by his performances and the successes of Hunchback of Notre Dame and Phantom of the Opera. This is from the beautiful 4K restoration. It was also released by Flicker Alley here in the U.S., but this release, same restoration, even more extras, and you can get it for a fraction of the cost of the Flicker Alley release. What I also love about Eureka is this is the standard edition, because I stupidly missed the limited edition, but it still retains the booklet and the reversible artwork. So all you're really missing from the deluxe version is the slipcover that has this original poster art on it, which you get on the reversible sleeve. So I kind of tried to find the limited version after I missed it, and then just realized I was going to have to get the standard version, and then I realized, wait a minute, they still have the booklets and everything. What have I waited so long for? But I do think this is the version to go for if you are region-free, because, again, the packaging is wonderful. You get this lovely booklet with some great essays. You get brand new extras. This has a piece by the legendary Kevin Brownlow on the film. And again, I think this is the better package. Not to say the Flicker Alley release is bad, because it is great, but it's not as, elaborately put together in terms of having as much extras. And also, the key factor is this is a fraction of the cost of the Flicker Alley release, even when it isn't on sale. And with the free shipping, that helps too. But if you haven't ever seen this film, please get a copy of this. The restoration is absolutely incredible. It's far and away beyond what we used to have on the old Kino DVD that's been out of print for years. It was amazing that this got restored and got a Blu-ray release, let alone a deluxe Masters of Cinema release, which I do think, again, is the best presentation available of the film. So I wholeheartedly recommend this to all fans of silent cinema, who, of course, have probably already seen this by now. But if you haven't, for some reason, definitely take the time. This is one of the great silent masterworks. Moving on to Spine 249, this is the 1924 version of The Hands of Orlac with this lovely artwork in the Masters of Cinema series. This, of course, is the famous story that's been adapted many times and I think was really perfected when MGM turned it into the 1935 horror masterpiece Mad Love. So if you, like me, absolutely adore that film as the artistic triumph that it is and the arrival of Peter Lorre to American screens, this makes a fascinating comparison because this does the story much straighter in terms of more of how it was originally written. And seeing it this way is really interesting. I haven't seen the film in a while. I've only seen it on DVD before, but this is from a new scan and restoration. It is loaded with extras, but most interestingly, it actually includes an alternate presentation of the film, which is actually comprised of a lot of alternate takes. So I guess this would be one of the many silent films that was shot with two cameras from two different setup points for foreign export negatives, for example. So this could be an example of that, and why there's a complete second version of the film on here. That it is only in standard definition, but the Eureka is to be commended for including it, particularly for those specific differences. And then we get the same art on this lovely booklet. I guess this is technically a limited edition. I don't know if it's actually credited as being such, but it has the nice booklet, and it has the more custom case design of a limited edition. This is, again, easily the best release of this film that exists. Has the most extras, and the great part, besides having the wonderful booklet, this has a Tim Lucas essay in it, is the inclusion of the secondary version, even if it is just in standard def. And I really love what they did with all the artwork, giving it this red tint, where it really comes across with all the nasty, morbid, macabre elements of this story. And of course, Conrad Veidt is one of the great actors of the silent screen and is great in everything he ever did. So if you've never seen this film and you've always liked the sort of Hands of Orlok story, then you need to really check this out. And especially if you love Mad Love as much as I do, this is a fascinating comparison piece, because this is a well-made film, and the inclusion of the alternate version with all the new extras was just too tempting. And of course, it was included in their little horror flash sale, so I picked it up finally. Now we move on to the limited releases with slipcovers. These are all new releases that normally I don't pre-order things, but I wasn't going to wait on these because it was, they're all pretty much horror titles, and it includes some of my favorite films like this one. This was a great surprise. Eureka has released the 1932 version of The Most Dangerous Game, the true classic version of the classic Richard Connell story. I think the definitive version of the story, because it actually improves upon the original story, and it's also in between being an adventure film and literally made on the on the start of King Kong, because Ernst Schoedsack and Marion C. Cooper were actually preparing and about to start King Kong, but it took more pre-production than they had expected, so they wound up making this entire film in the lead up to that. But it also manages to be a pre-code horror film as well, and a lot of those pre-code elements are in full display. It's also the leanest and tightest 62-minute film you'll ever see in your life, because this is a film that you should study for story composition and pacing, because it is absolutely incredible just how much material is here, and improving on the original short story, and having the wonderful, grisly, enjoyable pre-code elements in a 62-minute runtime. The slipcover has the promotional poster artwork of the island, which is absolutely incredible. Eureka slipcovers always have great quality to them and a nice feel, so even though I'm not one for slipcovers, Eureka is really the one company where I'm like, okay, if there's a slipcover, I don't want to miss it, because I know they're going to put some effort into it. Then the cover itself uses original poster artwork in the Masters of Cinema design. This is from the 2K scan done in Germany a number of years ago that came out on Blu-ray, which is the best available master this film has ever had. Unfortunately, it fell into the public domain decades ago and has been cursed with tons of terrible releases and a whole myriad of problems. It's been restored several times, and the German Blu-ray was exorbitantly expensive and then went out of print immediately, because I think it was limited to like only 1,000 copies. So this gets that master, and then includes a whole host of new extras and a new commentary, which is great, and has lovely original artwork, has a great booklet, and then the under tray has the alternate poster artwork that highlights the grisliest element, General Zaroff's trophy room with all of the dismembered heads on the wall, which is part of the legendary sequence that was heavily cut from the film. So this is one of those pieces that us pre-code fans dream of somehow finding someday. And of course, have to have a shot of the iconic Leslie Banks performance as Zaroff on the other part of the inner art. The booklet is great because it includes two essays, but the primary one being George Turner's fantastic essay about the production of the film, which is, I think, probably the single most informative source you're ever going to find about the film, at least to this point in time. So that is a fantastic inclusion. We have the reversible art as well. This does really surpass previous editions on Blu-ray. However, it is not a perfect, pristine restoration. Also, interestingly, they do include both the new restoration audio and an unrestored track, which is something I've really hoped and asked for studios and labels to do because of my findings in the audio realm. So I'm extremely appreciative of Eureka doing this. I am going to do a full-scale review of this and all of these as soon as time permits. But this was just a fantastic surprise because I thought I was never going to get to see that German master because, again, it went out of print almost immediately and is absurdly expensive still. And one more chance to go back to this film in finally better quality than when it's had before and see Joel McCrea and Fay Wray running around the famous Skull Island sets once more from King Kong is an experience everyone should have. So this was one of the great surprises of this entire year of disc releases. And their Spine 270 was another surprise. This is another reissuing of a brand new 4K master and restoration of a silent classic that has been released on a great Blu-ray here in the US, a title I've already reviewed. But finding out that Eureka was going to do it with brand new extras and deluxe packaging meant take my money now, because they have done the 1923 Universal The Hunchback of Notre Dame with this absolutely stunning usage of original poster art on the slipcover. I think this is one of the finest slipcovers I've ever seen. It's, of course, in Eureka's traditional style, so it's a nice, very thick cardstock, lovely sort of green to follow the sort of green color that's inherent in the front poster art, but that's what a slipcover should be. I mean, that's just absolutely beautiful. If you're going to do a slipcover, do it right, and this is absolutely gorgeous. The case itself uses other original poster artwork. This is the limited edition, and once this sells out, it'll just be the standard case version. This has brand new extras, and of course is the same 4K restoration that Kino put out that I raved over. If you've never seen this film, you're in for a treat, of course. But if you've seen this film, the way it's been stuck all these years, even in previous restorations, this is a revelation because it's still being sourced from the same 16mm source, which is all that unfortunately survives for Hunchback. So the quality is limited to that, but what Universal was able to do with this 4K restoration is, again, a complete revelation. I love that they actually have used production stills for the interior art. So here you have the technical crew and the cameramen set up. Then we have the wonderful booklet with, of course, great stills, the interior artwork. Of course, there are some great essays. And in the best touch, they have actually reproduced the original 1923 Souvenir Premiere program in the booklet in its entirety. This is something, I believe this was on the Kino disc, but in image form, but it's wonderful having it actually printed. So again, this is the same new 4K restoration that Kino has released, but Eureka has gone the extra mile in terms of packaging, commissioning a whole host of brand new extras, and I'm sure their encoding is going to be a little bit better, as it usually is. So I do think this is now the definitive version to get for this film. The Kino does have a handful of exclusive extras. It has a good commentary, and it has some bits of Chaney's own home movies, which are fascinating. So I guess I'll have to hang on to that disc just for those. But otherwise, I do think the Eureka is the superior package. It has far more in the extras department, and they are all brand new and commissioned for this release. And again, just look at that. So if you have Region B capability, this is a title that you should pick up immediately. This is one of the best silent presentations on the Blu-ray format in terms of restored titles, even though they're still working from the same 16mm source. So I was just ecstatic that Eureka announced this, and then of course I had to actually pre-order it. So I'm very much looking forward to revisiting this restoration, even though I just watched the Kino not too long ago, just because I'm so excited to dig into this Eureka release. Of course, I saved the two non-MOC titles for last. These are more of the Universal Horror collections I alluded to earlier. Like I said, Eureka usually tries to come up with at least some sort of theme for these, and both of these are essentially revolving around being Boris Karloff vehicles, or having Karloff as the star. So the first one is Maniacal Mayhem, which gives 3 films. Both of these sets have 3 films that sort of follow in the same sort of design of having 2 more sort of in the classical period and then 1 in the 1950s. So this brings together The Invisible Ray from 1936, which is an underrated part of Universal Horror, and really, even though it gets more into science fiction territory, is probably among the last of the golden age of Universal Horror, because both it and Dracula's Daughter are pretty much at the end in 1936, under the last sort of gasp of the Laemmles having Universal as a studio. Then we move on to the really underrated Black Friday, which is more of a science fiction / crime gangster picture, and also with a bit of a sort of Jekyll and Hyde theme, but a film I find really fascinating. And the unfortunate part is Bela Lugosi, while he is at his dashing best in The Invisible Ray, and it's a shame that he doesn't have more to do in that film, he has incredibly little to do in Black Friday, and it is very badly miscast. He still gives it everything he has, but it's actually kind of embarrassingly silly what they make him do in being a gangster, and what happens to his his character with very little screen time is really unbecoming of such a legendary figure. However, Karloff is excellent. I think the theme is, while it's kind of a hokey idea, and it seems like it might be more along the lines of what might happen in one of Karloff's Columbia Mad Doctor films. And of course, being written by Kurt Siodmak, it has to deal with brains and identities and brain transplants and things. I think it's a really fascinating film, even though the concept of Karloff being a doctor who just happens to have theories about the brain, and his friend is injured and is dying, and so it's necessitating the experiments of Karloff's character to come into play by transplanting part of the brain of a dying criminal into his friend's brain so he will survive. And of course, then the criminal identity then starts to reassert itself, and then he has a dual personality, very much akin to what you might think of in the classic Batman 66 series villain of King Tut. So it has a sort of comic book flavor, and of course that idea goes way back into the golden age of comics, even in the golden age of Batman in the early 1940s. There is I can't remember what the story was called, but there is even a Bill Finger story with that same sort of villain setup. So it's an old idea, but I think it's really done well here, and Stanley Ridges is the actor who plays the character, and he gives a really wonderful dual performance. So I think that's what really sells the picture. And of course, Kurt Siodmak wrote it, so of course it has to deal with brains. But I think it's a really underrated part of Universal Horror, so I was happy that it got a Blu-ray release. This is capped off by the 1950s entry, The Strange Door, which is another Karloff vehicle, but it's also a vehicle for Charles Laughton. And it's been a while since I've seen it, so it'll be nice to see it on Blu-ray. But it sort of plays like a sort of riff on Karloff's classic role in The Black Room, with maybe a little dash of his character in The Raven. So it's interesting to see Universal trying a couple more horror-tinged films in the early 50s, but they really didn't lean heavily into it, and most of them are sort of costume or period pictures like this. And so it's fascinating to finally see more of the obscure films and the well-regarded but lesser discussed films finally get a Blu-ray release. These were, of course, done by Shout here in the U.S. in their Universal Horror collections, but here Eureka has packaged them together in terms of giving them a sort of theme. This is just like their Poe adaptation set, their Inner Sanctum set, so they've been doing the various Universal horrors, but they are at least packaging them together in a sort of theme, unlike Shout, who seems to be mostly just gathering together titles willy-nilly. They have commissioned new extras for this release, so the problem with these is that they are not able to carry over everything from the Shout releases, so unfortunately, if you're like me and you love listening to the horror historians, actually have to get quite a number of these releases. I think the Eureka ones are the better package, and of course are much better encoded, and they have far more in terms of extras, in terms of the amount of extras. But if you want absolutely every last commentary, for example, you do have to go back and research, and there are some of the shout sets you will have to get, and Eureka has not yet done all of the titles Shout has, but they're moving along at a good clip, so I think they're probably going to get to that point pretty soon. So when you take the slipcover off, just like the other sets, you have the actual case itself displays the key art for one of the films, and we have the credits on the back. But when you open the case, the reversible art is actually the one-sheet poster for the other two films. So it's a nice touch that you're able to then display on the outside, should you wish, the actual film that you prefer the most. Now these are, or at least mostly are, shorter runtimes, so they're able to have the first two films on the first disc with the associated extras, and then the third film goes on a disc by itself with the rest of the extras. This being the limited edition, you get the lovely slipcover, and then you also get the nice booklet that's loaded with stills. Boris on a not-so-good day. Each film gets its own essay and write-up. There's a nice piece about Black Friday and the Karloff-Lugosi pairing, and there's also an essay on The Strange Door. So I do think that Eureka's really hit upon something with these, of doing these nice editions, commissioning the new extras, but coming up with a sort of theme package for all of them. These have primarily been focused on the classic sort of eras of the 30s and 40s with the golden silver age of horror, but they've also tiptoed again, and they've done the Inner Sanctum, which I have behind me. They've also done some of the 50s science fiction horror films in their volume that crossed over into the 50 science fiction films, but that was done in their wonderful sci-fi horror set that's in the same sort of vein, where they also were able to tuck in the very important Man-Made Monster, which was Lon Chaney Jr.'s first starring vehicle for the studio in 1941, and that success led to, of course, doing The Wolfman with George Wagner directing again. So these are, I really enjoy these. I think these are the best presentations of the lesser known and discussed films that fall under the Universal Horror banner. I think they're much more impressive than the Shout Factory releases that they're sort of the UK version of. And I really do enjoy the sort of packaging based around a sort of theme. It definitely shows some time and care has gone into these. These are all from 2K scans. They're all obviously provided by Universal, but it's really the first new work that's been done on them in years. And for almost all of them, save for one film in the Inner Sanctum set so far, these have been very clear upgrades over the old DVD sources for the ones I'd seen on DVD before. So if you love the Universal Horror realm as I do, as you should, I think these are the no-brainer versions to be going for, and the limited editions do sell out relatively quickly. They will be replaced by standard versions with the same disc contents, but these slipcovers are really nice, and these are not very expensive, and with the free shipping, they're still a fraction of the cost of what the Shout sets are going at list price, especially because those are very pricey for some unknown reason. I'm not exactly sure why. So even though these are 3 film sets instead of 4 film sets, it's balanced out by the nice packaging and the far greater amount of new extras. So again, I'm always really happy when Eureka announces they're going to do another one of these, because I've been so pleased with the work they've done so far. So this was a must, as was their other release, because they've been having success with these. These are all selling really well, it looks like, so they pretty much did 2 at the same time. So the other, following in a same exact sort of pattern, is the Universal Terror featuring Boris Karloff collection. This brings together, again, 3 lesser discussed films that, these are definitely tiptoeing in the horror genre, and also with some tinges into being period films and science fiction films. They're not always necessarily going to be called horror films. If a horror fan sits down and watches these, they're maybe not going to sit as well with them as a pure out and out horror film, but I think they're all fascinating, and one in particular I absolutely adore. That is the first film in this set, which is Night Key. This is really not a horror film. It's been put in all the Boris Karloff collections. It really is one of those films that it's got a great sort of character for Karloff to play. He plays an old inventor who has been ripped off by his former benefactor many times for all of his inventions in terms of security services and technological wizardry. So he decides to enact his revenge by going on a citywide crime spree to show off how there are flaws in the security system that he himself designed and was not credited or paid for. It's also fun because Karloff's character is essentially the doddering old absent-minded professor, complete with thick glasses that he can't really see without, and it gives him this whole shtick to work with, and it's beyond charming, even though the film itself is very much, I mean, you could call it a gangster film, and I think people would kind of understand that. So it's basically more of a light-hearted crime drama with some science fiction elements thrown in terms of the electrical wizardry of what Karloff is doing with obviously 40s technology, so electric eyes, and the idea of a security company being around and securing businesses long before that became a sort of accepted standard practice. But I think Karloff is magnificent in the film. It's got a great heart. It's also not very long, so it definitely does not overstay its welcome. It's a film I always enjoy coming back to, and I'm really excited to see what it looks like on Blu-ray from this new 2K scan. But don't go in thinking it's a horror film. The posters try to make it look like a horror film. They tried to sell it as a horror film, but it's not really a horror film, and Karloff is magnificent getting to play a role that is completely opposite to what he was typecast as. Now, the climax from 1944 is a bit of an oddball. This is a big Technicolor Universal production, and essentially what it is their follow-up to their 1943 Technicolor remake of The Phantom of the Opera that starred Claude Rains. That film is famous for being much more about the opulence of the opera and the operatic numbers of more than the actual story of the Phantom himself. The Phantom kind of becomes a supporting player, and they made him a sympathetic character, and it definitely does not really play like Gaston Leroux's original novel, nor the 1925 masterpiece with Lon Chaney. It's still a great film in its own right. It's enjoyable, but it never quite has that spark to it that you really associate with the Phantom. It's of course, beautifully mounted, which is why I think you can still admire it. And of course, Claude Rains does magnificent work, even if his Phantom is sort of hampered by being made sympathetic, and they don't really allow that to get to full fruition. But in any case, the film was wildly successful, so Universal tried a follow-up, which is the climax, and they got Boris to star in it during a time where he decided he was going to come back to Hollywood after the success of Arsenic and Old Lace. He signed a 2-picture deal, wound up making The Climax and House of Frankenstein, and regretted being back at Universal, particularly for House of Frankenstein. But The Climax is really a dull picture that doesn't quite work. It is very much repeating almost every element of the 1943 Phantom of the Opera remake, right down to being in color. And you have George Wagner directing, so you would think that with all of these names and Universal starting to get some energy again in their new wave of horror films, it's a film that doesn't really ever quite work and is very much in the shadow of the 43 Phantom. So it's a film that I don't think you're probably going to understand as much if you don't know the 43 Phantom and how successful it was. When you see them back to back, you can definitely tell, it's basically like an afterthought of the 43 Phantom. It echoes a lot of that film. Not only is it in color, not only does it revolve around music, but Karloff's character is sort of Phantom-like in a lot of ways. And the story elements do seem to really repeat the 43 Phantom, almost beat for beat in a lot of ways. So some people have gone so far as to say it's actually a remake of the 1943 Phantom of the Opera remake, but just disguised in certain ways. I do think that's apt in certain ways, but it has been a while since I've seen the film, and I am very curious to see what it looks like on this new 2K scan, because it is really beautiful to look at, even if you might be bored. Some people say Karloff himself actually looks bored in the film. Again, it's been quite some time since I've seen it. I didn't really have the best impression of it the first time I saw it, so I'm very curious to see what I think of it coming back to it in this new 2K scan, and if it's anything like the 1943 Phantom remake, which really did improve. I think when I got to see it in HD, and now it's available in a new 4K scan on the UHD, which is a real knockout in terms of the visual improvements. I'm very curious to see what seeing this in HD from a new scan really does, because I do think it will help the overall impression of it, just like the 43 Phantom did for me when I saw it on Blu-ray. So moving on from there, then you have The Black Castle, which again is from the early 1950s. Again, it is a sort of period film with the horror-tinged elements. This was something Universal really started doing really, I'd say for sure back in 1939 with Tower of London, which is a really underrated key film and the sort of relaunch of the silver age of horror films that Universal started with Son of Frankenstein in the same year. Same director too, of course. But anyway, in The Black Castle, again, it's been a while since I've seen it, but it does seem to almost... maybe, I guess reference would be a good word. There's a sort of feeling of, it's got a little bit of Edgar G. Ulmer's 1934 The Black Cat, the classic Universal horror, in terms of having people stuck in a sort of ominous, it's not a castle on the Black Cat, of course, it's the Art Deco mansion of Hjalmar Polzig, but it sort of has that feeling. If you're familiar with The Black Cat, I think you'll get that sort of idea. But again, it's interesting to see, just like with The Strange Door, this is Universal trying another attempt at a horror film, but sort of hedging their bets by making it a period set horror film. And it does seem like they are at least pulling from some of their 1930s films in terms of some elements. And of course, having Karloff as your star, that automatically hedges your bets even further. I've only seen this film once before as well, so it will be interesting coming back to it and seeing it in this 2K scan. Again, these are all 2K scans from original elements, except the climax is credited as being a 2K scan from the film's inner positive. This does have brand new commissioned extras expressly done for this release. It's in the same type of design, so you take the slipcover off, credits on the back. The front has the one-sheet poster for Night Key. And then you open to find the 2 discs, reversible art with the one-sheet posters for the other films. And of course, the lovely booklet with many sides of Boris. And again, each of the films gets their own time to shine with an essay for each of the releases. So I really, again, I am always happy every time Eureka announces they're going to do another one of these, because I've been so pleased with the work they did. Ever since their 3 Poe adaptation set, that, to be quite frank, that really knocked my socks off, because the extra mile they went to in terms of disc encoding, packaging, coming up with some really nice extras, and the fact that they included the reconstruction of Murders in the Rue Morgue and didn't even announce it. That was just put on as an Easter egg, and that alone was worth every penny of the purchase. So ever since then, I've been really eagerly anticipating any more of these they would do, and I certainly didn't expect that all of a sudden, for this point in 2022, we would get not 1, not 2, but 3 classic Universal horror releases. The 2 3-film sets, and a beautiful reissue of Hunchback of Notre Dame. So this is a treasure trove for Universal horror aficionados. So these are the 2 new limited editions of, Universal horror trilogies, I think you could say, all starring Boris Karloff, continuing in Eureka's Universal horror series releases. For me personally, this Universal Terror set was worth every penny for Night Key, because I love this film, and I'm really interested to look at the extras and revisit the other 2. And then Maniacal Mayhem is worth every penny for Invisible Ray, which is underrated and definitely grows on you. Plus, it has the great Francis Drake in it from Mad Love, and also the great Black Friday, which is very underrated as well, even though Bela Lugosi is put in a very secondary role that is really unfair But I think the central performances are outstanding. So I'm really looking forward to looking at all the new 2K scans on here and digging into the extras. So here are the spines. So these are what I picked up from Eureka. They're new releases and, of course, they're sale titles. They do sales on their website of various titles all the time, and they're really getting into some really interesting territories in their new releases. It does seem like they are doing more of a focus on horror and Hong Kong titles because those are apparently their biggest sellers. And once they started really dipping their toes into classic horrors and doing these Universal sets in particular, that really got me interested. I do really love the work that they do, and the fact that their shipping is still free for international shipping. I don't know how they do it. I'm amazed, and their shipping is really all their packaging is excellent. I've not had any issues from them whatsoever, and again, I don't know how they get away with free international shipping. I hope that continues because it's really helpful to the wallet, and it makes these even better bargains. I think going region free for certain labels is a good idea. And in particular, I think if you simply went region free to be able to view some of these wonderful Eureka releases that are, when they release titles that have been done here by U.S. labels, they really better them in almost every single occasion. I would actually say 100% of the time for all the ones I'm aware of, particularly these where they are outdoing in terms of really the disc encoding and the extras and the packaging just across the board. So if you've not gone region free yet and you didn't know if there was enough to sort of whet the appetite to do so, it's quite easy to do. It's not very expensive. You can get a region free Blu-ray player for about $100 or less, actually. And then if you get one, you can get actually ones that are cheaper, and you do the things like the top menu trick and so on and so forth. But that's not always guaranteed to work. But basically about $100, give or take, when things go on sale, can get you a modded region-free Blu-ray player. And I mean, really, these Eureka titles alone are worth that because they're doing great work, and I am so excited that I've now chipped away at more of the titles and new releases I was really looking forward to. And again, really excited to check out the extras and the new scans. And the extra effort they go to with these is truly appreciated. It also makes me happy I didn't splurge for all the Shout sets because I've been wanting to get this for some time now, and I have one of them. But when Eureka started doing these, I figured I might as well just wait for them to do some more because their extras packages and the overall package was so much superior. And on top of that, for all of these, with shipping to the U.S., was actually less expensive than just getting 2 of the Shout Factory Universal Horror collections. And given Shout's extremely slow shipping time, which I did order a disc or 2 from them for their Halloween sale, let's put it this way. This order had pre-orders in it, which meant that it was delayed. This order came from the UK, so it was shipped with international shipping. This order of titles got here faster and better packaged than my tiny Shout Factory order of sale titles. So, and this had pre-orders in it. So, again, if you've never ordered from Eureka, they do a great job, and the shipping is relatively fast, extremely well packed, and it's free. And I can't believe that they're able to do that, and it makes these an even better bargain. I think Eureka is doing some of the best bargains on the entirety of the Blu-ray format right now. And again, their site frequently has sales, so please go and check them out. It's very user-friendly if you're here in the U.S. and you're worried about currency conversion, all that stuff. It's very easy to order from them. And again, the shipping is free, so there's really no reason to not check them out. They're doing great work, and I'm so happy that I have these wonderful titles to dig into, even though it's already November and I'm still doing classic horror films. Well, that's just what I do. I can never cram in every single one I want to watch every October. So even though it's technically now Noirvember, actually Noirvember is almost already over, here I am still talking about classic horror films. But anyway, in any case, I hope this has been at least somewhat fun and informative. If you're interested in any of these, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you've already gotten and watched and enjoyed some of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. I think Eureka's really knocking it out of the park with these lovely releases. And as always, keep your disc spinning to help keep physical media alive, keep supporting boutique labels and studio labels. And thanks ever so much for watching.